This is a very special Shabbat, our Scholar in Residence weekend, sponsored both by the Weingold family as well as our men's club and our sisterhood. And for those that were here last night and heard the opening talk by Dr. Andrew Porwancher, it was very incredible, very engaging, and very insightful. Last night he spoke about Teddy Roosevelt and the Jewish vote, and it brought up a lot of questions, at least for me. Here, even though that was focused in 1904, what's happening in America in 2022. And as an American Jewish historian, I think that we have a lot to learn. And so I hope that I'll encourage you not just to hear Dr. Porwancher this morning in a moment, where he's looking back in history, but also to have an opportunity later to stay with us for the extended Kiddush and talk to him about what's happening today, and the opportunity later after Kiddush, the author of The Jewish World of Alexander Hamilton will be speaking specifically about this book. Dr. Porwancher got his PhD in Cambridge. He has had fellowships at Harvard and other institutions, and he is currently professor at the University of Oklahoma in Norman, Oklahoma. We're very honored to have Dr. Porwancher here.
Shabbat Shalom.
Let me just raise this. Sure.
In the fall of 1789, George Washington issued a Thanksgiving proclamation on the fourth Thursday of November in what would become eventually a recurring national holiday. He called on the American people to unite and give thanks to what he called, quote, that great and glorious being, the beneficent author of all the good that was, that is, and that will be. Why did George Washington choose that particular moment to ask the American people to render their gratitude? What was its broader significance to America's Jews? And what might George Washington's Thanksgiving have to teach us today? In the 1780s, it was not at all clear that the American nation would survive much longer. True, America had won its independence from Britain, but the 1780s were marred by political turbulence and economic turmoil. There was legitimate concern that the Republic could collapse into anarchy and bloodshed. The prospect of civil war between American states seemed disturbingly imminent, and as the founders were well aware, efforts to establish republics throughout history had routinely failed. And so the Constitutional Convention, as seen from the perspective of 1787, was a last-ditch attempt to salvage America's experiment in self-government, to stave off the forces of bloodshed, to vindicate the professed ideals of the revolution. As the delegates met in Philadelphia that summer, they not only created a new frame of government, they took a radical step for religious freedom. They included in the Constitution a ban on religious tests for office, thereby opening federal office, both appointed and elected, to people of all religious backgrounds. Now, the First Amendment to the Constitution was still 4 years away in the offing from being ratified. It was not known at that time that there would even be a Bill of Rights. So this is the only clause in the original text of the Constitution concerning religious liberty. And it's all the more remarkable because at that time, most American states barred Jews from either running for office, practicing law, casting ballots, or some combination thereof. By the standards of the day, the United States Constitution was an extraordinary step forward for religious liberty. Now, we must keep in mind that when the Constitutional Convention concluded its work in September of 1787, the Constitution was just ink on parchment. Only if the states ratified the Constitution would it take legal effect. And opponents of the Constitution seized on the ban of religious tests. They sought to catastrophize it, to weaponize religious bigotry in their bid to defeat ratification. One newspaper warned that the Constitution, quote, gives the command of the whole militia to the president. Should he hereafter be a Jew, our dear posterity may be ordered to rebuild Jerusalem. And this kind of intolerance wasn't just directed at Jews. At the Massachusetts ratifying convention, one delegate voiced exasperation that, quote, a Turk, a Jew, a Roman Catholic, and what is worse than all, a universalist, may be president of the United States. And so we see that anti-Semitism was inseparable from religious bigotry writ large. And yet, in the face of this intolerance, the voices of enlightenment carry the day. To celebrate ratification, the city of Philadelphia hosted a grand federal procession, a parade held on July 4th, 1788, to inaugurate the new Constitution. The esteemed statesman Benjamin Rush, who signed the Declaration of Independence, marveled at the parade's display of religious unity across sectarian divides. In his own words, quote, the rabbi of the Jews, locked in the arms of two ministers of the gospel, was a most delightful sight. He continued, there could not have been a more happy emblem contrived of that section of the new Constitution which opens all its powers and offices alike, not only to every sect of Christians, but to worthy candidates of all religions. I hasten to add there was a massive feast concluding the day's festivities, and in a gesture of inclusivity, the parade organizers ensured that there was a kosher table for Jewish participants, including raisins, crackers, and I have discovered in my research, salmon. So we know that the Jewish penchant for salmon reaches all the way back to the 18th century. This is a major I might get an endowed chair at Stanford for that discovery. At a comparable parade in New York City, a few weeks later, the procession was originally scheduled for July 22nd. And remarkably, the parade organizers changed the date because July 22nd fell on the fast of Tammuz. And they wanted the Jews to be able to participate. This at a time when anti-Semitism was mainstream in political discourse. This at a time when Jews were no more than 1% of New York City's population. It is a remarkable gesture towards inclusivity. And at a meal punctuating the New York parade, representatives from the city's various denominations came together. There was an Anglican, a Lutheran, a Calvinist, a Presbyterian, a Catholic, and yes, a Jew. And what makes American history so unique is this trans-denominational approach to religious freedom. If we look at Europe, we see that religious minority groups were afforded rights or had their rights restricted as a group unto themselves. But in America, the Jewish quest for the free exercise of faith was part of a trans-denominational struggle to secure the blessings of religious liberty for all people. Following the Constitution's ratification in 1788, the federal government swings into action the following year. The founding generation knew not whether the republic would survive, whether it would endure in perpetuity or perish in its infancy. But this much was clear: all of their hopes were pinned to the new Constitution. Its success or failure would determine the fate of the republic. And because the Constitution itself represented such an extraordinary advance for religious freedom, the cause of religious liberty became inseparable from the survival of the American Republic. And so it was at that critical moment that George Washington issues his Thanksgiving proclamation. It is at that moment that he calls on his fellow citizens to render their thanks unto God, to pray for the preservation of the Constitution, and to give gratitude for the religious liberty that we all shared. Among those clergy who heeded President Washington's call was Gershom Satius, the leader of New York Synagogue Shearith Israel. He convened his congregants in their synagogue on that fourth Thursday in November, and he praised the Constitution as a legal charter inspired by God himself, one that banned religious tests for office. In Satius's words, "We are, through divine goodness, made equal partakers in the benefits of government by the Constitution." The congregation concluded the day by chanting a hymn that had been a staple of Jewish liturgy for centuries, and I'm sure you know it, Adon Olam. Today, more than 230 years after the ratification of the Constitution endures as the oldest surviving national frame of government anywhere in the world. And with it, the cause of religious liberty lives on. As we approach Thanksgiving in a few short weeks, let us reflect on our gratitude to live under a system of government that draws no distinction between us and our Gentile neighbors with whom we only wish to live in peace. But that gratitude must be wedded to vigilance. The question of Jewish belonging in America has resurfaced with disturbing relevance. We've all watched with horror, for instance, as neo-Nazis marched through the streets of Charlottesville chanting, "Jews will not replace us." Well, encoded within those 5 words is a rendition of American history. A rendition that says people like them came first and people like us are outsiders, people like them represent the essential character of America, and people like us somehow threaten it. The story of George Washington's Thanksgiving and Jewish participation in it is an important reminder that the neo-Nazi narrative of U.S. history, it's not just morally repugnant, it's factually erroneous. Jews have been a part of the American experiment since its very inception. And when the American Jewish community today lays claim to its stake in this republic, know this: we do so with the righteous winds of history at our back. The book of Psalms tells us that the protector of the children of Israel must neither sleep nor slumber. Well, in this country, the children of Israel are protected by a constitution that enshrines a right to worship freely according to the dictates of our ancient faith. And in the defense of that right, we will never sleep and we will never slumber. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Dr. Porwancher. This was really both an insightful focus on George Washington and the first Thanksgiving as we're approaching Thanksgiving, and it's also meant to be a little bit of a teaser, so hopefully you'll join us for our extended Kiddush and return to hear Dr. Porwancher's larger talk about his book, The Jewish World of Alexander Hamilton, and join us also Sunday morning for his presentation at 10 a.m. With that, we're going to continue in our service. We'll rise as Cantor leads us from Musaf back in our prayer books, page 1.